Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today, we're here on behalf of Employment and Social Development Canada as their return to office implementation team. I am Dorothy Rodrigues, and I'm joined today by Tuka El Romhani, Summer Khan, Eileen Stevens, and Abdullah Rahman El Said. Today, we'll be discussing a pressing issue in the public service, the ethical considerations of the return to office, RTO, mandate, its impacts on social media and public service ethics and values. Our goal today is to present a balanced, ethics-driven approach to RTO implementation that respects both organizational priorities and employee rights. Next slide, please.
What's happening within ESDC presents three competing forces: the return to office directives, the government's push to regulate public servants' social media use, and the deeper ethical question of what it means to work in public service today. On one side, the government wants employees back in office for collaboration and consistency. On the other hand, employees are using social media to express their frustration, which has been the result of the arbitrary nature of the RTO directives. But in doing so, they risk crossing ethical lines about neutrality and professionalism. At the heart of it all, trust in public service is eroding. This isn't just about enforcing rules, but about understanding why there's a lack of motivation to return to the office. Next slide, please. Looking into this issue has given us a clear path of the problem. There's a lack of employee motivation to comply with the directives and return to ESDC and Service Canada offices. The lack of motivation for RTO among employees is not just a personal preference about where to work, it's also directly tied to how the directive and explicitly workplace ethics and organizational effectiveness. The current RTO directives and their rollout are perceived lacking justification for the return to office after 4 years of remote work. By not engaging in deeper consultation with workers and by missing the opportunity to engage younger workers who value a purpose-driven workplace to instill the value that in-person work brings, the RTO is perceived as being at odds with both the ESDC and the Government of Canada's respect for people. Next slide, please. The impacts of the government not properly motivating employees to return to office are being felt in person and online. The top-rated posts of all time on the Canada Public Servants subreddit are negative reactions to returning to the office. Memoranda of understanding and recognizing hybrid working arrangements have been signed between public service unions and Government of Canada departments. And by implementing a directive that reneges on these understandings, goes against the values of respecting people and acting with integrity. As a result of the new working model, unions have been staging in-office campaigns, and the Public Service Alliance of Canada has recently launched a campaign centering the benefits of a hybrid work environment, stating 81% of workers prefer to work in a hybrid environment. Lastly, the public's trust in government has been declining since the COVID pandemic. Surveys conducted by Ipsos place faith in public servants internationally at 28%. Focusing on Canada, the OECD reports that 54% of Canadian respondents have trust in the federal service. The lack of motivation to comply with the RTO mandate is not just an internal HR issue. It has real consequences for public perception of government institutions, their effectiveness, and their contribution to the public good. Next slide, please. The current ESDC Code of Conduct allows for responsible individual expression. When an employee voices their frustration about returning to the office on social media, the problem is not the post itself, but the frustration that led them to make it. Restricting social media may seem like a straightforward solution. It appears to protect public service neutrality, prevent misinformation, and avoid conflicts of interest. In reality, it only treats the symptom and not the cause of employee dissatisfaction. Cracking down on social media use might stop the noise, but it won't solve the problem. Given ESDC's unique workforce composition and mission, we propose that ESDC be exempt from the social media restrictions proposed by TBS. Employees should be allowed to express themselves on social media as long as they follow the social media guidelines set by the ESDC Code of Conduct, which states that employees should conduct themselves in a manner that doesn't harm the reputation of the department, Government of Canada, or the clients they serve. We will explore policy options that address RTO demotivation that creates a work culture where employees don't feel the need to resort to social media. Next slide, please. Rather than altering the existing ethical framework, we're using it as a guideline to shape our approach to RTO implementation as long as it is applied consistently. The Values and Ethics Code for the Public Sector and the ESDC's Code of Conduct of respecting democracy and people, acting with integrity and excellence, and stewarding knowledge and resources already provide a strong foundation for decision-making. Our goal is to ensure that any policy recommendation we bring forth aligns with these ethical values. The goal of the RTO directive is to motivate at least 85% of public servants in ESDC to return to the office for 4 days a week starting in June 2025. This directive is not a new concept. It builds on earlier RTO policies implemented in 2024, which faced strong opposition due to their lack of flexibility and inconsistent application across departments. The following issues are impediments to this goal. Firstly, many employment and training advisors, or ETAs, within ESDC find themselves working in silos. As decentralized public servants, ETAs are spread across the country, often working with clients rather than internal teams. Their effectiveness is not inherently tied to physical presence in an office setting. The original intent of RTO to foster collaboration and reinforce the values of the public service doesn't align well with the nature of their work. Second, ETAs have been reassigned to Service Canada offices, and rather than reintegrating, they face resistance from existing staff. Finally, work rules are not being enforced fairly. Some managers and departments apply strict in-office attendance policies, while others are more lenient about enforcing the mandate, creating frustration and a sense of unfairness among public servants. To tackle siloed work, managers and ETAs need to increase in-person communication. Harvard Business Review found that 95% of survey participants believe in-person meetings are necessary for successful long-term working relationships. Where possible, ETAs should engage in weekly in-person meetings, supplemented by regional team building initiatives where teams are more decentralized beginning in June 2025. With this, respect for employees and the workplace will increase, which is in line with the ESDC and Government of Canada's core values of respect for people, acting with integrity, and excellence. To make ETAs feel more welcomed at Service Canada offices, ESDC needs to improve work excellence by 2026 by facilitating team building opportunities. The department must recognize the reality that placing ETAs in these offices has caused cultural friction, which goes against its value of valuing diversity and maintaining a safe and welcoming workplace. Lastly, to resolve unfair enforcement of rules, ESDC needs to ensure that at least 90% of employees understand the application of rules by the end of 2025, which can be attained through facilitating information sessions on the objectives of the RTO mandate. By means of this consistency, teams cultivate respect for democracy through elimination of favoritism among coworkers. These measures also contribute to fostering a welcoming and psychologically safe working environment. Next slide, please.
Incentives positively correlate with desired behavior. We look at our policy options as carrots, sticks, and sermons as they address our problem in different ways. Our carrot approach is to introduce RTO directives with increased paid time off, or PTO. We propose introducing at minimum an additional 2 weeks PTO subject to change based on collective bargaining. Increased paid time off will serve as a positive incentive to encourage employees to return to office, and in exchange, they can be out of the office more often. PTO can also increase productivity by allowing employees the time to recharge. An Ernst & Young study found that for every additional 10 hours of vacation time that employees took, their year-end performance improved by 8%. Additionally, Donald J. Savoy, the Canada Research Chair in Public Administration and Governance at the University of Moncton, reported that use of sick leave by public servants increased by 68% over 10 years. By providing an incentive like increased PTO, employees are given the opportunity to focus on their well-being. Improving well-being and boosting employee morale are key to encouraging employees back to the office and working in the best interests of the public. In terms of impacts, we see in the short term that the knowledge of increased PTO can entice employees back into the office, which will increase compliance rates, with minimal additional PTO being used. In the medium term, the rate of employees using PTO will increase, while returning to office will plateau in the long term. In the long term, we believe that PTO will have to be complemented by other incentives, such as office redesign or team building, to maintain in-person attendance. Next slide, please. Our stick approach would be implementing RTO with a more cohesive enforcement of penalties. The current RTO penalties include verbal reprimand, written reprimand, suspension without pay, and termination of employment. However, these measures are not evenly enforced due to increased administrative burdens on managers. Punitive measures for not complying with RTO are likely to push employees to return to office. In the short term, this can be highly effective. However, this is likely to lead to further lowering employee morale and therefore poor service delivery, which impedes on our ability to steward. In the short term, we expect pushback from unions and public servants for strictly enforcing penalties associated with noncompliance. In the medium term, there will be a steady rise in return to office compliance rates among public servants and ETAs. With declining employee morale, in the long term, we expect a high compliance rate, but with likely low morale and incohesive working environments, all of which are in contrast to the positive work environment the ESDC's Code of Ethics and Values sets out to foster. Next slide, please. Employees have argued that the RTO directives without compelling data are arbitrary. Our sermon approach includes providing evidence to support RTO directives, which can better encourage employees to return to office. There is evidence and data to suggest that in-person work is ideal for productivity, idea generation, and networking. However, there is also counter evidence to suggest the benefits of working from home. In the short term, public servants and unions will be provided with data and evidence confirming that in-office work has tangible benefits that can't be replicated with remote work. In the medium and long terms, providing convincing data-driven decisions for return to office work contributes to positive change in office culture and reinforces the ethics and values of public servants. Continued research dissemination on the importance of in-office work and its contributions to an ethical working environment can be shared through Lunch and Learns, where employees rotate on presenting a topic during a paid and catered lunch hour. Catered lunches require a small budget increase, but 1 year of monthly catered lunches equates to roughly the cost to replace and onboard one junior level employee who left the public service because they did not experience a collaborative and values-driven environment. Next slide, please. Our policy options are not silver bullets and do not satisfy all stakeholders. Penalties could incrementally improve service delivery through quantity. More public servants will be at their desks with mandated working times and can open more tickets. On the other hand, penalties could impact quality of service delivery. More tickets will be opened, but public servants could display their dissatisfaction to the public through impatience, annoyance, and other negative feelings. This could further decrease trust in government and the services they provide, which does not meet the ESDC and Government of Canada values of working with integrity, respect for people, and stewardship. Likewise, an information campaign about why returning to the office is optimal for public service delivery could improve that delivery, provided the information is from established research institutes and not cherry-picked to fit the narrative. Next slide, please. As a strategic investment with long-term benefits to the public service, we recommend implementing RTO directives with incentives, or RTO with PTO, because our research suggests that while negative reinforcements or punitive measures may be more effective in the short term to increase RTO compliance, they will not contribute to an ethical and respectful work environment. There's a trade happening here. Employees are giving up some flexibility associated with work from home. Employers need to acknowledge this and give them something in return in the form of an incentive. Along with a hybrid working environment, employees regard PTO as an important employee benefit that contributes to their well-being. If we are to build an ethical, high morale work environment, we need to incentivize employees through positive reinforcements. If ETAs and ESDC employees feel supported with additional benefits, they will be more motivated to return to the office. Next slide, please. In terms of implementation, leave entitlements for employment and training advisors, ETAs, are governed by the Treasury Board of Canada policies and collective agreements, rather than directly by the Canada Labour Code. The Treasury Board of Canada would negotiate the collective agreements with public sector unions, including Public Service Alliance of Canada and/or the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada, to grant increased PTO. The timeframe for implementation varies, but typically spans 6 months to 2 years. This includes negotiation, separate deliberation among management and unions on proposed updates, voting to accept these proposals, then reaching a collective agreement. Once an agreement has been reached, there would be implementation for several years. To maintain long-term RTO compliance, there would need to be additional incentives, as mentioned before, such as office redesign and team building activities. Next slide, please.
In terms of feasibility, there's an established collective bargaining framework that is used to negotiate between TBS and unions that has been used to reach several successful collective agreements on leave, such as increased parental leave. Given the success of past negotiations, we can facilitate similar bargaining structure to achieve an agreement on increased PTO. In terms of costs, implementing an additional 2 weeks of PTO per year for employees would result in approximately 3.85 reduction in annual working hours, which translates to about 75 hours. The total cost per employee would average $3,300 in additional paid leave. Next slide, please. We have looked at potential risks and how we can mitigate should we encounter them. There's a risk of malicious compliance where workers comply with RTO by returning to office, but resist the directive by engaging in presenteeism, resulting in lowered production and lowered morale. To mitigate the potential for this, rule enforcement on creating a respectful and welcoming office space should be practiced with precision, not bluntly. With increasing PTO, there's a financial risk where employees work through their vacation time, choosing instead to receive a payout. To mitigate this risk, policies on minimum vacation time taken in a year and caps on how much unused PTO will be paid out should be developed and negotiated during Labor Management Committee meetings. Finally, there's still the risk of employees resisting RTO mandates, which can damage the morale of in-office workers. Nudging employees who have not negotiated remote work agreements through changes that will impact their behavior and their ability to productively work remotely can encourage employees to work in office. Resistance to RTO is an expression of continuous concern regarding the directive. If this frustration is ignored or met with strict enforcement, employees may escalate through social media. The Fraser case established that public servants have the right to express concerns about workplace policies as long as it does not undermine their duty of loyalty. We reiterate our original point that social media directives only address the symptom of the problem. The SDC should proactively engage employees by addressing their concerns internally. Next slide, please.
In summary, we've discussed a pertinent issue in the public service, the ethical challenges of the RTO mandate and how they contribute to an unmotivated staff returning to the office. We've discussed its impacts on ETAs and ESCD employees on social media messaging and workplace trust. We've also presented 3 policy tools, which are carrots, implementing the RTO with incentives, sticks, implementing the RTO with penalties, and sermons, implementing the RTO with information. We've recognized the obligation to carry out the RTO mandate and, as requested, have developed a plan and timeline to implement our recommended policy option, implementing the RTO with incentives. We'd be happy to share any of the research we use to substantiate this discussion today. We're pleased you were able to join us for this valuable discussion, and we thank you for listening and look forward to your questions. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you so much. Very, very, and I understand. I'm a newbie here, and I understand you guys are newbies here too. So welcome, McMaster. I'm at your campus all the time because I have a grandchild just a few blocks from it. So regularly there. It's obviously you put a lot of work into this, and you work really close as a team, and it was very, very impressive to see the work you did in such a short period of time. So my congratulations to all of you. I had an order, but actually, you know what, Nancy, you're first on my list. So over to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. This obviously, as our Chief Judge mentioned, this is very interesting work, and I appreciate the recommendations. I'm really fascinated with the option around incentives, and so I'm just wanting to dig a little bit deeper on the implementation of that. Can you share, because you talked through that collective bargaining process, and I'm interested to understand, like, what is the sort of I understand paid time off is what the employee groups would be in receipt of. I guess with respect to returning to work specifically, what is the Government of Canada getting from that negotiation? Like, what's the specific outcome? If I can get you to give a little bit more detail on that.
Thank you for that question. So with offering more paid time off, the outcome that the government would be receiving is that employees, should they accept it, understand explicitly that they're receiving this in response to returning to the office. So it's a matter of both the employees understanding that they'd be receiving this additional benefit that would allow them to take more time off and recharge, learn new things, bring that back to the office, but explicitly bringing that back to the office and sharing that with their team members when they are there.
And I'll just quickly on the follow-up side of things. So are we negotiating that all of these folks are then working in the office all the time in exchange for that paid time off?
We would be negotiating for the memoranda of understanding to be updated to implement the 4 days in office, should they accept the additional paid time off. It is our opening offer. There is the chance of negotiations being developed that ultimately it might be 3 days of in-office work with less paid time off, or adjustments in different areas of benefits. But ultimately, we're working towards enforcing the 4 days as directed in the recent RTO implementation strategy.
And lastly, just very quickly, any thoughts or analysis that you did around offering more time off to employees when there's some concerns from the public around service delivery?
We did. We were very concerned about the perception of more time outside the office for employees when there are high wait times. But ultimately, this is an investment into the department to ensure that those employees remain as employees, that they don't leave Employment Service Development Canada for either a different department or returning to the private sector or the third sector with non-government organizations. There could be some service disruptions if more employees are taking more paid time off, but there will be a greater contraction of service in general if we lose more employees all at once.
And I can just add to that quickly. Through our research, we found that increased vacation time actually can lead to better output and better productivity for employees, which could lead to better service delivery in the long run.
Thank you for considering my questions.
Thanks so much. I'm going to pass you to another senior management of ESDC, Stefania.
Thank you. I'm turning around because I have your presentation on, just looking at it on another device. Can we go back to slide? It's the one on the social media directive. Can't really tell which number it is here. It's slide 5. And so I wonder if you can elaborate a bit more on the recommendation here. So what you're saying is no additional restrictions to what currently is the directive, or can you just explain that a little bit more, please?
Thank you for your question. We recommend not adding additional restrictions to the social media directive. We've looked into previous outcomes of public servants expressing their right to freedom of expression publicly, with the rulings that have been brought forward with that, particularly around the Fraser case, where there is some sphere for public servants to express their satisfaction or their dissatisfaction with the government, provided that ultimately they're still able to effectively serve the public. We believe that employees continue to have that right to express their dissatisfaction. We also believe that it's shining an important light on larger issues within ESDC and possibly within other departments of the federal government as well. It's important that people are able to connect. If we restrict this freedom to express themselves, we'll further be siloing workers, whether that's in person or online where they're not able to connect and talk about these problems. The ultimate output, if we do restrict more social media use, is that employees will be burned out. They won't have anyone to talk to about it, and they'll leave the workforce.
Okay, so
Michael, you have your, sorry about that, go ahead.
if I understood correctly, so you're making a distinction between further restriction as compared to making sure there's compliance with the current rules? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Noah. On that same slide on the social media directive, by the way, thank you very much for your presentation. I really did enjoy listening to your brief. It was well delivered. On this same slide on social media, I'm looking on the green side of the slide, and the second bullet, employees are using societal media because they feel unheard. And I found that really interesting, and I'm just curious to know about the evidence that you have that that's true. The reason I ask that is that if that is true, it suggests there's some constructive steps we could take to provide alternative vehicles to express themselves that may actually scratch that itch. So perhaps you could share a little bit on that, and then I just have one follow-up question on the RTO as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. So we did do an environmental scan of social media. We checked anonymous Instagram accounts. We checked Reddit. We did a couple of Google searches to see if there are other avenues where public servants are expressing themselves. We also checked different subreddits on Instagram, not only for provincial and municipal governments within Canada, but we also checked other accounts for US federal workers, as an example. And obviously, there's a lot more dissatisfaction with those employees currently. But what we have found with the outputs of Canadian government workers is those who are writing are unhappy. So we don't have full numbers about a sample size versus population size, but what we have seen is that the majority of posts that are online are reflecting a negative experience of working for the government of Canada.
Interesting. My follow-up question is around the RTO, and it's really around the issue of congratulations on discussing levers, both incentives and disincentives, as well as more information. I really enjoyed that discussion and those points you made. On the incentives discussion, what you're proposing is to an expenditure to help grease the skids a little bit in terms of encouraging a certain form of behavior. My question is this: how will this likely go over with the public? And the reason I ask it is that there's already a cabinet directive which reflects cabinet. Treasury board ministers have decided that this shall be done. So there's a directive that's been issued. Most public servants think they're going to get this for free. And yet we're suggesting, was it $8,000 per employee was sort of the price tag that I thought I heard mentioned at one point during the presentation, multiplied by X number of employees. Sounds like a fairly significant price tag. I guess my question is, what's the incremental get associated with that for the public? And what's the likelihood of the public accepting that for value for money? Thank you.
That's a very good question. Thank you. I believe the figure is closer to about $3,000 per employee. It's also our, as mentioned before, it's our opening bid, so there could be some further negotiations. For public perception, we believe that
Very quickly. Quick.
we believe that increasing paid time off for employees will have a better reflection of the government as opposed to just offering an increase in salary. It's also more beneficial for employees. A higher salary doesn't necessarily relate to higher or better value output from employees.
Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you so much, team, for your advice. Obviously, a lot there to think through and consider for implementation.